This is Jason David Frank, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
I am very happy to bring back for another round of Silver Surfer Talk Matt Felicent, my fellow Cinema Geek man. How's it going?
Hey Dan, glad to be back.
Yes, we are continuing our discussion of the Silver Surfer series by Dan Slott and Mike Allred. We're talking about Volume 2. If you have not checked it out, go to the episode post and you can see our first discussion previously where we got into the first volume, also talked about Matt's background into comics, what brought him into them, what brought him out. And now we're going to continue that conversation as we look at Volume 2. And going back to that first volume, and one thing we talked about is how by the end of it, you felt like it really got its legs and started going. So now that we're in Volume 2, did it continue that momentum? Did it falter at all? And how did this stack up compared to the last volume?
Oh, man. So I think in the first volume, you know, we all know Silver Surfer, right? Like, so we have to get to know this Dawn, the new character, and then see how they interact. And so it was like slowly building up that relationship. And then by the second one, like, I feel like they had the relationship, and the stories were interesting and way more. They were way more foreign rather than being like on Earth, like these terrestrial stories that make an interesting cosmic character, which is what you want in a Silver Surfer book. Feel like I liked Dawn less in this one, but that might just be because she's at conflict with the Surfer at one point, and it's like, I want to give the Surfer the benefit of the doubt because I love him and I've been reading his comics for years, and she should just know that he's a good guy now.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't mean it when he killed trillions of people. Like, he was under the spell of Galactus.
Yeah, man, don't be asking for receipts on some dude's past.
Yeah. I can kind of understand that. I do think, like you mentioned, the second volume does pack a lot more story in. I mean, you even have the one where you know, they go off into that like void and he's trying to find Dawn, and we get a lot of flashbacks into all these different adventures that happened previously, and it was like, wow, you know, it really covered a lot of ground really shortly. And it really seemed like this volume specifically, again, was focusing on developing that relationship between Dawn and Silver Surfer, you know, providing conflict, obviously, by the end of it. But did you feel like, besides the fact that she kind of is a little bit more adversarial by the end of it, I think most of this book is hinging upon that relationship. Did it work for you in this volume, besides the issue that you brought up?
Oh, I love it. And I love that that's very first comic is like the thesis of this volume, where it's like, hey, Surfer, you need to feed me. Hey, Surfer, I need to go to the bathroom. I'm a human. Like, we can't just fly on a board for 3 months straight. They have this thing where it's he's getting to know her and she's getting to know him at the beginning. And then by like the second or third issue, oh, it's been months now, and like I couldn't be without this tagger on. It develops their relationship in a very real and meaningful way, which I feel like is something that's oftentimes skipped over in like, I want to say in comics, but in all things. Like, if you look at the Thor Jane Foster relationship in that first Thor movie, they didn't do a good job. And though this is not a romantic relationship necessarily, at least not at this point, that has even more meaning to me, that they've spent issues and issues developing just a friendship necessarily. And there's definitely love and trust there, but like, they did such an amazing job slowly building this relationship in a very meaningful and real way, while not necessarily losing the small stuff of, hey, I need to eat, while still being able to turn that into a great Silver Surfer joke.
Yeah. I love, you know, basically you're seeing Silver Surfer see this world that he's been traveling through fresh eyes in a lot of ways. And, you know, you mentioned that opening of the volume where, you know, she's being a nuisance maybe, but the fact that she has to eat and go to the bathroom and whatnot, but how by the end of that issue, that relationship is a little bit further established, where her human tendencies allow him to see something that he really never saw before. You know, they sit down to watch that nebula expand or explode, and how her naivete comes into benefit him in different circumstances. And she's not necessarily just a figure for damsel of distress, which she could easily be, but you know, she certainly is her own character with, you know, her own capabilities, and they play off each other really well.
Yeah, this second one is just peak. I don't know, I love that first issue so much, where like he pulls out her tonsils, like, you know, she's being annoying. She's like, oh, I've got my tonsils are swollen, and he pulls them out, and she's like, you need to get me ice cream to make up for it. And he's like, but you're not in any pain. I use the power cosmic. Like, I'm the greatest surgeon in the universe. And then, but then, you know, that ice cream leads to an adventure, and then everything after that. Like, it's great the way they interact, and I love that. And you wouldn't have gotten that without that first volume. And so it's such a great setup, and it's such a great payoff.
Yeah. I love the snowball effect of a lot of these plots, right? Where, you know, like you mentioned, it starts out as just going for ice cream. It starts off as just like looking at this beacon, and it just evolves into something a lot more. Something as innocent as letting her drive the surfboard leads them to discover, you know, a planet that was hidden from him, and then of course we get the Galactus piece at the end. I mean, that's probably something we can talk about too, is, you know, that piece of her discovering his past and him coming to terms with it. And I love how there was like a callback to a joke that was made. I don't remember what issue it was that he had, where it's like, I judged your planet and you passed, and her realizing just the weight of what that actually meant, and like realizing like, well, that's kind of sadistic. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of true. Again, it goes to show just even though Silver Surfer is, you know, certainly not the herald that he once was under Galactus, he still doesn't, I think, have a full grasp of humanity like someone like Dawn does.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of that Dr. Manhattan quality to him, which makes Dawn so important to kind of bring him back to reality. Because if you're just nearly a god that can surf the entire galaxy without some mortal to bring you down to Earth, so to speak, I imagine it could just be numbing.
Yeah, definitely. I know we talked about last time how there were some double page spreads that were at times hard to follow. I feel like this volume, even like, it doubled down on those. There were a lot of them. I felt nearly some of the stories where it was almost every piece was told in these, you know, not splash pages, but certainly double page spreads with like tons of panels laid out. Did any of those other issues occur where you felt like you got lost in some, or did you felt like this one they were a little bit more easy to follow?
I think rather than maybe having you know 2 or 3 localized towards the end, I would have, you know, 1 every quarter on this one. But honestly, the first one comes like 3 pages in, right, when she's like, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to eat, I need to go to the bathroom. But what's funny is that, like, I didn't even realize it until I got to there was no chance of me realizing that I had messed up on the one page. Like, sometimes you get down to the next panel and it's like, does this work? It was almost like they condensed both pages into just the one page, because she goes, hey, I gotta pee, and he goes, okay, and then she goes, hey, I gotta eat. But if you look over on the other page, it's showing them stopping somewhere for the bathroom, it's showing them stopping somewhere for the food. And so it's like, it did the same concept to me, even more effective when I read it accidentally wrong.
Yeah, just in a way, the repetition of that accent ends up working out, because it's having that pattern. I guess it works either way. It's like a palindrome where it works backwards or forwards. It's similar to that.
Yeah. And I feel like by the end of the book, by the end of the second volume, it comes up, that style of layout comes up so much that if I mess it up, it's on me at this point. They've established that this is what they're going to do, and this is how it's going to read. And so if I'm not investing myself in the book enough to realize that, then I blame the reader.
User error, as they say.
For sure.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be challenging. I think this one worked really well. I especially liked when we get into the endless sea of night, that storyline, and where you just have them, and it's just like panels with nothing but black in the background, and then just a slight outline to kind of showcase the different panels and how they laid out. I thought that was interesting because up to that point, we're in this world where there's so much to it, there's so much detail, but I think it really showcased how much like emptiness there was in that sequence.
I love that sequence for a number of reasons. One, I love when artists do interesting things with page layouts. Maybe if like a whole page is one room, but there's panels throughout that room. Like I love that, and I love this where it's like these disjointed dark panels because they're lost in this darkness, and it's like very clearly like they're all wibbly wobbly, they're all this black space, and then like it would go into like a memory. And it's like full color and vivid like it was with just black panel or black edging down the sides to let you know that Silver Surfer and Toomey are still adrift. And it would like go back and forth between these great solid bright memories and then these dark disjointed panels. And it was just a great way to visually represent something that you just couldn't get in a book.
Yeah, I thought that piece was pretty brilliant. And at first, honestly, I missed it. I'm like, I was just focusing on the story that was in between, and then I looked over. I'm like, oh wait, there's Silver Surfer traveling throughout. I'm like, that's just a pretty cool idea. I love how we're already getting callbacks to some of the sharks, anthropomorphic sharks from the last storyline. How they're coming to try to get Silver Surfer. I think that's who they are. But and I love the alien creatures in this. And I mean, we get like a hillbilly aliens that have a floating Winnebago. And I'm like, I have no idea why that works, but it just does. Again, it goes back to just like they're going for it, and it makes no literal sense, but I think for this comic it works.
It's so great because it's like that story would never work as like a whole comic, right? Because at one point, like it's four hillbilly face billies holding down Silver Surfer on the board, and it's like that wouldn't happen, right? But that Silver Surfer just breaks away and turns a potato into a wedding ring, and it's like it's so charming. I love it.
I mean, not very often a superhero solves problems through literally, potato rings. So
yeah, transmutation is just another one of the Power Cosmic's many abilities.
As it mentioned, it is very convenient at times. And then obviously, finally, by the end, we get to this volume, the guy you assume they would be getting to eventually, and that's Galactus. Were you surprised that he showed up already? I know they're obviously, when you have Silver Surfer, eventually you're going to get Galactus in some form, or did you feel like it was fitting for what they were doing?
So I've never read an ongoing Silver Surfer book, so I don't know what the usual time is. Really, you sent me the all the books to the suggestions, and I was like, oh, Silver Surfer, and I looked that up, and it was interesting. And I was going to order just the first volume, and I saw Galactus on the cover, and I know you don't trust a comic book cover, man. Comic book covers are the worst things in the universe. But like, I was like, well, I love Galactus. He's probably my favorite cosmic force in the Marvel universe. I find his stories interesting and compelling because he's like a force of nature rather than a villain, and so that's always makes for an interesting story. And I was like, I got to pick up that second book. If the first book's any good and the second book is good plus Galactus, then I'm down. So like I was expecting him just because I had seen the cover.
Well, that will do it for sure. Though, as you said, I don't know many covers I picked up in the 90s that's like, this character will fight this character. Almost only one will survive, and then they both do. And it's like, that's...
Or they show up on the last panel, and they're like really angry, and then the second panel of the next book, they're friends.
Yeah, exactly. But I do like how they eventually got to it, though, where you have this world that is just the refugees of the planets that Galactus killed and destroyed, and just the fear that they have of someone like Silver Surfer, and the realization that he slowly goes through, realizing who all these people are. And obviously this is, as we mentioned in the opening, kind of where we get that breakdown from Dawn, realizing what Silver Surfer has done. But I was surprised. I think in a sense that made sense because you had to get to Silver Surfer's past eventually, because it's that thing that's kind of hanging in the background where she's falling for this guy, or the relationship's really building, but she doesn't know this really big thing that he used to do. I liked how you see how devastated she is and how it like rocks her world, but then finding out and seeing and putting her in the situation where she is willing to really make the same choice and come to the realization of why he did what he did, rather than him just explaining it. It set it up to where, you know, she had to kind of do the same thing, and to understand exactly why he would go and sacrifice himself for Galactus.
Yeah, it's a real kick in the gut, that this last story where she feels like she can't trust him anymore, and like, how could anyone ever murder someone else, let alone trillions of people? But then right by the end of it, she's making that same choice, and it has me, more so than seeing Galactus on the cover of Volume 2, the end of Volume 2 has me interested in Volume 3. Like, because it's like, where do they go from here? Like, how will the relationship continue? You say it goes on for another couple more volumes. Like, I'm interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I thought, honestly, because it's been a while since I read this first volume, I'm like, wait, does she become a Herald of Galactus? Is that where it goes? Because, you know, it could, you know, that could happen. That was a really powerful moment too, where you see him like knowing what that means to her, and knowing what would happen with that, and like doing everything he can to prevent it. And skipping over one of the best pieces of this volume, when he literally is surfing a moon and, you know, throwing it into Galactus, which I thought was like, that, you know, that's a pretty badass moment.
Oh, it's so good. Like, every moment of that move, because it's like, everyone's like, what is he doing? And she's like, he's surfing. He's surfing the moon. And then there's like 2 pages of him just like riding the moon like it's his surfboard into Galactus's face. But he's Galactus. Like, it's so good. They did an interesting thing where they did a fight between Surfer and Galactus, something we've seen this before. This happens occasionally. But like, and you know how it's gonna end. Like, because Galactus could just revoke the Surfer's powers, right? Couldn't he do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what he kind of thought he did, but Surfer, I guess, turned his power off before he could fully do it.
Turned it off. You know, he used human deception to defeat Galactus. It's so good to do the exact opposite of what happened in the first one, right? The first one I talked about how he's got this near infinite power and nothing can beat him, but so you have to do these intellectual stories to make it interesting, right? But then he fights someone that is more powerful, and it still has to have an intellectual like solution, because that's the way he's going to win.
Yeah, but it's also kind of interesting that it's not Silver Surfer that ends up winning the day. I mean, he helps, but it's really Dawn and really them giving up and just like fleeing that ends up finding the answer, where, you know, they can't defeat him. Like, you know, they realize that there's no winning, so they have to just run away and fight another day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not even like a victory or even a stalemate, really. Like, they ultimately, this planet is lost. This culture, derived of a million different cultures, is shattered and fragmented, and who knows if it'll survive. Galactus doesn't get his prize, but no one wins, and that's the best they could have hoped for.
Yeah, and I do like the, you know, as we talked about, where we see Dawn make that sacrifice, but how it came to be, like, why would she do that for people that she didn't know? But seeing where you literally have an entire planet like giving themselves up individually, but Galactus not caring, because it's like, I already destroyed them. Like, why do I care? But there's something about humans that he's like, yeah, they make good heralds. Like, they, you know, they have the right ingredients, I guess. But so I thought the realization, or how it got Dawn to the point where she would sacrifice herself, made sense without it feeling forced, or it felt very organic in how it occurred.
Yeah, and what's so great about that, like, Spartacus, I am Spartacus moment that they have, is that, like, these people have lost everything. They've lost everything, and they don't want to lose everything again. Whereas, like Dawn hasn't lost anything. Like, she's at, like, her peak life. Everything, like, you know, she hasn't used up anything until she met the Silver Surfer, and that's when she's finally living. And so, like, what she's offering is so much more to someone like Galactus than what all of these refugees could ever offer.
Yeah, and We do get even somewhat more background to her that we didn't talk about, like where the polka dots come from and where they're where they're established. Obviously, it's a big reference to Kirby and Kirby dots, but it also has a personal story to her and how her father used it to identify her, using a bumblebee costume or something of that nature. So I liked that there was reasoning behind almost everything, characters' decisions, even costume choices.
Yeah, like that was such a striking moment, like in that very first volume, when after we've had the childhood and then the grow up scene, where they show Dawn's sister at all these different places, and she's got this bumblebee theme, and it's like when you see the first panel where they're like 5, it's like, yeah, sure, they've kind of got like a bug thing going, but then when they're adults and they still have it going, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. But then in volume 2. It's like, no, this is how my dad used to be able to tell us apart because we're twins, and that can be difficult for some parents. It's a payoff for something I didn't know I needed a payoff for, and it just the way it layers onto itself. That if you're there and you're paying attention, it just keeps building.
Yeah, and I'll say that that's something that doesn't stop. And as I mentioned last episode, the last time we talked about this, it's something that is built in, and it's like layer upon layer, where there's even more payoffs with certain story elements that will be coming in the future, and how they relate to what's here. It's all connected. Like, this is clearly Mike Allred and Dan Slott went in this with a certain plan and idea, and it wasn't one where they like, I have 6 issues that I know I can write, and then after that let's see where it's going. It felt like within these first 2 volumes there was a clear plan in place, and they're layering it bit by bit.
Yeah, and it works so well.
Was there anything else you wanted to bring up or discuss regarding this?
Oh man, I know that I'm gonna keep reading. Like, I'm definitely gonna buy volume 3 before too long, and get into that one because like I love it. I'm so excited for it, and it's, I don't know. I think I enjoy it more now that I've had a discussion, because I remember thinking about it last night, like, where it's like, it's got all these elements that I love, right? I love the humor, I love the silly, I love just the visuals of all of these weird aliens, and I love the interactions between the 2 characters, but I don't know if I love the whole thing. And then like we sit down and you're like, yeah, but what about this? And it's like, yes, I do love this thing, like a whole lot.
Yeah.
It's so good, and it really gets me.
Yeah. When I first read this, I actually jumped in, I realized I jumped in the beginning of the Galactus story. Like, that was the first issue I read with I forget why. I just remember just seeing Silver Surfer. I'm like, oh, I know Silver Surfer. And I was somewhat confused at the time because I had no idea who Dawn was, but I was not reading comics from like regularly, so I just assumed that this is a new character. But going back and reading this fully again, beginning to end, it's similar to you. I've grown in appreciation with it a lot. It just doesn't. It's not afraid to be goofy, but with that, it's also really endearing and sweet at times. So,
such a great story, and it works so well for its medium. That said, like, we're sitting here, we're talking, we're singing high praises. This is not a book for everyone. Like, I can't think of a single friend to really suggest this to. One of the things I love about buying trades is loaning them to other people so that I can have that conversation later. And there are very few people I can think of that would get anything out of this.
Yeah. I have a Chuck who I did Talking in Circles with. He's a huge Silver Surfer fan. He owns the entire run of the Silver Surfer comic from the 90s. I thought about recommending this to him. I'm like, I don't think he would like it because it's so out of the norm for the character, and he's like not a Doctor Who fan at all. So he wouldn't really appreciate that influence at all. So I agree. I think there are some people that would, because it does change some things. It alters some things. Like, the board is more sentient than it typically is, from what I can remember, and he can power down, and he doesn't really talk about his original love when he was Norrin Radd all that much. It's more focused on Dawn. So for some people that like the traditional Silver Surfer story, even though this has Galactus, might be a little bit out there for them. But I think for those that it's meant for, it works really well, I guess.
Yeah. And besides, like, how long has he been the Herald of Galactus? Like, centuries, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, there's no way his old wife is around anymore, right?
I don't think so. I don't know. Yeah, I think she's long gone, I would assume. Because even in this, he talked about, he was, was centuries old since he's been the Herald of Galactus, and based upon the fact that you have like millions of different planets are on this one planet, you would think it was some time, because it's not. I would think Galactus doesn't need to eat 3 meals a day. I could be wrong, but
Oh no, he's definitely like one of those wildcats that eats once and is good for a month or two.
yeah, like a python.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that drawn where like after he eats a planet, he looks like really fat because it's like he's got a big ball in his stomach.
Oh, you know that's been drawn.
Well, I think the Tick did that because they had a spoof of Galactus in one of their cartoons, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Oh, I'm sure.
all right, well, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Matt, if people want to get in contact with you or talk to you more, what would be the best way to do that?
Oh, I'm always at Fridley Sun if you got anything to say to me. On Twitter.
Yeah. I'm also on Twitter at Movie Revolt. You can also check out the show on Facebook and Instagram. Just search Comics Concierge. If you want to send us an email, you can do so by sending it to movierevolt@geekcastradio.com. Also, leave an iTunes review because that would be awesome, and you would get a virtual high five from me. And and a lot of things, exciting things plans coming up. Want to leave a comment in the show, you can do so by going to Geekcast Radio or nerdly.co.uk. But remember, the comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.